Welcome to We Need to Talk about tech, where we talk about the past,
present, and future
of technology.
Hello, everyone in podcast land. Welcome to this week's episode.
On this week's episode of the podcast, we talk about Epic Games officially releasing Unreal Engine 5. We talk about Elon Musk becoming the largest stakeholder in Twitter.
And we talk about GM and Honda announcing they will co-develop an affordable electric car for 2027.
So our first topic of the podcast is in regards to Unreal Engine 5. Epic Games recently had a State of Unreal Engine 5 kind of event where they went over the release of Unreal Engine 5, and it's released now. It's officially released. It's out there to the public. And, we've seen quite a bit from it in the past. We've definitely seen some really impressive demos from Epic Games. And now we know there's going to be some developers that are really taking advantage of Unreal Engine 5, and they're kind of shifting to the development. We've heard developers like the Coalition, who make the Gears of War games, formerly, Epic Games personnel that made up that studio. Gears of War was officially an Epic Games game for the Xbox 360, actually. And then they spun off when Microsoft bought the IP, made their own studio called the Coalition, and they announced that, hey, they were going to make a game and it's going to be Unreal Engine 5. We also heard from the likes of CD Projekt Red, who officially announced that they're going to be making a fourth Witcher game, and it will actually not be running on their own engine, the Red engine that all of their previous games have ran on, but instead they're going to be shifting over to Unreal Engine 5 as well. And Crystal Dynamics, we talked about them recently on a podcast about helping out Microsoft's initiative team, but they're also going to be making their own game, a new Tomb Raider game. And once again, they announced, hey, we're going to be switching over to Unreal Engine 5. So this is actually really interesting because Epic Games is really kind of focusing Unreal Engine to be the be-all and end-all of video game development. For years, most studios took pride in developing their own engines to make their games. Sometimes may only be used for one game, or, they might build out this engine so that they can make all of their games easier to develop going forward because they have, the expertise, or the tech is designed specifically for the personnel that work in that studio. But what Epic Games is trying to do is they're trying to say, hey, our platform with Unreal Engine and the tools that come with Unreal Engine are so easy to use that we think you can adjust your entire workflow to Unreal Engine going forward and really kind of make video game development a lot easier and a lot quicker. And it's going to be interesting to see if this actually pays off. But, from the demos that they've shown a few demos already. We talked about them in the past, but even some of the new demos, or even the Matrix demo that they had a while ago, this stuff is looking really, really impressive. And it's going to be interesting to see how these games actually turn out. I did see some opinions from, really good professionals like Digital Foundry, for example. They talked about, hey, The Witcher 3 is a very foresty game, a lot of foliage in it. And Unreal Engine technically isn't great at foliage. It's much better for like concrete and cities and stuff like that. So I would imagine that Epic Games probably wants more developers like CD Projekt to be using Unreal Engine so that they can make it better. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're actually contacting these studios who have made these really impressive games in the past, like, CD Projekt Red and The Initiative and Crystal Dynamics, to say, hey, we want you on board with this engine. We want to prove to the world that this engine can be the best engine for making video games. We know you guys are talented developers. Help us make Unreal Engine better. And it would be interesting to see if that actually pays off. But I'm curious, did you see anything from this Unreal Engine 5 launch? And are you excited to see that more developers are starting to take Unreal Engine and switch over their games to Unreal Engine? Or would you like to see maybe the industry spread out a bit and maybe move away from Unreal Engine the way that it used to be?
I have seen a bit around the launch of it. I've seen a bit of press around it, and I definitely think it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and this is kind of, some of the publicity or some of the talking points that they've put out about it, right? And I think when we first talked about Unreal Engine, and the MetaHuman builder, this is one of the points we brought up too. This is going to make game development a lot easier. You know, you brought up CD Projekt Red. One of their most popular games, you know, I was going to say successful. It kind of depends who you are, whether or not it was successful, was Cyberpunk 2077, right? And a lot of why that took so long to develop and why there were so many bugs with it is, like, you know, partly because they were building their own game engine. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of other things behind it, but a big part of game development, if you are building your own engine, is building an engine successfully. And if you think of how much manpower, how much time they could have saved it, and, you know, instead of building this sprawling metropolis that they ended up building for Cyberpunk, if they could have, you know, outsourced some of that work or used the Unreal Engine where it had all of these assets already in it. Now, one thing that Epic Games, you know, the maker of Unreal Engine, has said is, yeah, we're going to make games easier for big studios like The Initiative, like CD Projekt, but we're also going to make game development easier and more accessible for smaller studios, right? So let's say if you and I wanted to start a game, we don't have to try and develop, you know, a brand new game engine from scratch, not to mention, you know, the physics behind the game engine, not to mention all the assets, not to mention the character development. This is all built into Unreal Engine 5. And I think one of the most notable things that I saw about this release is that the engine is free to download, free to use. You don't have to pay. Like, anyone listening to this podcast right now could go and download Unreal Engine 5 if they wanted to and start developing a game based off of this engine. The only time they're going to charge you is, let's say, if you make over $1 million based off of whatever game you're developing. I think it's a very noble thing. And I think it's putting your money where your mouth is, right? Or at least in terms of an engine development studio, right? Because for the past year, for 2021, a lot of the talk was, you know, around Apple and their app store fees and Google and their app store fees. But this is Epic Games coming right out of the gate saying, hey, we're not going to charge you until you make something successful. We don't want, you know, a barrier to people developing games to be, okay, can you afford this amazing engine that they've developed?
Yeah.
And, you know, speaking of games, you mentioned the Matrix game, you know, the Matrix Awakens, I think it was called. The little playable demo that they built to promote the movie and to promote this Unreal Engine 5. They've actually put that out for people to develop in for free. So the entire game, the entire city, down to every, you know, city block, every lamppost, every building is free to go in and explore. You can get into cars in this game and just drive it around to your heart's content. And it's also populated with 20,000 metahumans. Now, if you're not sure what a metahuman is, they have, along with the, you know, a game engine that develops physics for, you know, a digital game. It develops assets in terms of, okay, this is what the texture of a brick looks like. This is, you know, like you said, the texture of foliage looks like. This is what the texture of a lamppost will be. They also have built into their Unreal Engine a way to create humans, you know, to create NPC characters, let's say. So it's not, I have to develop every single human from scratch. It's a pretty streamlined process. And so this game, this Matrix city, is fully populated with people walking around, driving around. And it's kind of been described as like a Grand Theft Auto, just minus all of the profanity and drugs and let's say obscene gestures and obscenities in it. So, and this is just open for anyone. So like I said, if we wanted to develop a game, we could download Unreal Engine for free. We could get this city that the people behind the Matrix developed for free. And we could design a game within that, you know, that fully constructed city, fully populated city, and not have to pay a dime for it. So I think the fact that they have, put such a huge engine with, so many assets, with so many capabilities, and they're kind of putting it out there for anyone to use, I think it's definitely a sign for the future. And I think, as I was kind of touching on before, I think for bigger studios, it's definitely going to make game development easier. It's going to cut down development times. And I think for smaller studios, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to be easier for smaller indie studios to put out, very comparable games, compared to the AAA studios. So if you're an indie studio, you don't need to put out an 8-bit game because it's a lot less, it's a lot less expensive, let's say, to develop a game engine for an 8-bit game than it is for like a fully 3D world. But now Unreal Engine 5 is making it a lot more accessible for these smaller studios to make games that can compete with the AAA games easier.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a huge benefit when it comes to the sustainability and financial sustainability, especially for smaller studios when it comes to Unreal Engine's monetary or paid model. I definitely think it can help a lot of studios. And there's also a huge update coming to Unity, where those are the two main engines right now, especially for smaller developers to use, between Unity and Unreal Engine. My big, I guess, takeaway from it and the downside for me is, CD Projekt with games like The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, those games have a graphical style to me that I find very pleasing, much more pleasing than I've seen from Unreal Engine in the past. And I think that's the big thing, is these engines come with so many features built in that it would almost be almost be going backwards to not use them. The problem is, because they make certain things so easy, it could potentially, or I should say easier. I'm not a video game developer. I don't really know how easy it really is, but there is definitely a visual style to Unreal Engine, especially when it comes to geometry and lighting, that to me is less good, I guess, not as good as what I've seen from like the Red Engine. For example, I notice Unreal Engine games, from what I've noticed from games that I've played, lighting, there's a lot of bloom, softer edges and stuff like that make the game look a little bit more mushy than something like a Red Engine game, where something like The Witcher and Cyberpunk, very sharp looking games. And like, what I mean by that is like the edges of everything looks very sharp. It looks distinct. And I think that really helps with things like foliage, in something like The Witcher 3, where a tree looks like you can see those individual leaves and it looks good, as opposed to maybe just almost blurry mess where like the things kind of fade into each other, the different parts of the tree kind of fade into each other. And, with things like Unreal Engine and Nanite, I imagine when it comes to cities and bricks and like that demo for The Matrix Awakens, that stuff can look really cool. But yeah, I definitely think the only issue with this is a lot of games could probably start looking a little too samey or feeling a little too samey, which kind of defeats the purpose of, the artistry of video games. And I think there's a lot of art that goes into creating engines and the programming around how things are going to look in the end product that might get lost. But, that remains to be seen. Who knows? Maybe Unreal Engine 5 will be so adaptable. We've seen Unreal Engine 4 be really adaptable. Maybe Unreal Engine 5 kind of puts that into the next level, where we see really, really cool and different looking experiences going forward. But yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, would you say you're excited? Do you think it's a good thing, or do you think it's a bad thing in terms of, okay, hey, they may be the biggest engine, but in terms of assets, in terms of textures, maybe they're not the best. So do you think, it kind of sounds like you feel we're losing some good competitors then to Unreal Engine?
Yeah, I mean, and this is from an amateur stake. Like, this is from someone who has no idea about how to make a video game. But yes, I do think it's more of a negative, because I do like the distinctive visual style I've seen from something like Red Engine, or the RE engine from Capcom, or even the Creation engine from Bethesda. I like the way those engines work, specifically the Creation engine. I like the way it works with mods. Same thing with Red Engine. Like, there's so many things with those projects that are built off of those engines that to me have such a distinct visual style from one another and a distinct visual style from Unreal Engine that I'm definitely more of a fan of, if a studio has the resources to, developing their own engine from the ground up to have that unique visual style that's unique to that company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our second topic of the podcast is about Elon Musk and Twitter. The big news is that this week, or actually it's not this week, it was quite a while ago, but about a month ago, Elon Musk managed to purchase 9.2% stake in Twitter, making him now the largest shareholder in Twitter, much more than its founder, Jack Dorsey. So this is a big kind of change that's happening in the world of Twitter. Financially, they've been kind of under the radar. They haven't really been making a ton of money. It's kind of been an issue with a lot of social networks, is how do we monetize? How do we get advertisements on the site? How do we make money? And that's been something that a lot of investors have been really wary about with a lot of these companies like Snapchat, like Twitter. Facebook and Google, to a lesser extent, have really kind of focused on how to make money off of ads. But we've seen from Meta's point of view that necessarily hasn't been the best thing in terms of, public opinion and the way that they make money. So yeah, a lot of these companies have really struggled. But, Elon, had some tweets in the past talking about, hey, potentially, do you want to see Twitter change? Do you want to see things happen? And it seems like people really did want to see some change in Twitter. And then, shortly after those tweets, he announced that he was, purchasing close to 10% of Twitter. And, it's also been announced that he's going to be on the board. So he's going to be able to start making decisions, and potentially even, he also tweeted out whether or not people want to see an edit button on Twitter. And, it seems like, hey, that's already in the fast track to get done. So, he's very quickly made himself a staple in the name Twitter. And I imagine for investors, this is a fantastic thing, because anything Elon attaches his name to seems to be very well received from his fans and from his followers. We've seen this with Dogecoin in the past. And, the same thing happened to Twitter. The moment his name was now attached to the company, the stock saw huge gains, and the company saw huge gains, much more positivity on the stock of Twitter than they've really ever seen in the past. So, it's kind of interesting to see what's going on here, kind of like a celebrity in the tech market attaching himself to a social media company and announcing, hey, we might see some big changes in this company. I'm curious, have you seen much about this new direction for Twitter with Elon being at the helm as now the largest shareholder? And do you think it's going to help Twitter out in the long run of being a much better social network overall?
I've definitely seen headlines around it. I've seen some news around it. I think, like you said, anything that Elon touches seems to do well in terms of the stock market. So I think, the investors are definitely happy. And I could definitely see this, the price of the stock continue to go up simply because Elon's name is attached to it. Now, I guess it's been 3 days now of him being the largest shareholder in Twitter. What's interesting is that when he initially purchased, or I guess when it was initially announced that he had purchased so many shares, everyone was kind of wondering, like, hey, is he trying to take over Twitter? Because as you said, he's a very vocal person on Twitter. He does a lot of his, let's say, social activity via Twitter with all the polls that he has. Mm-hmm. So people were wondering, hey, is he going to be an active investor? Is he going to try and take over? But then initially, the first day, it was, no, he's going to be more of a passive investor. He just, wants to be closer with the company. He's not going to be running things there. And then all of a sudden it's, hey, Elon is actually appointed to the board of directors now.
Yeah.
And as you said, a lot of people have been complaining about the edit button for a while. And then he recently had a poll saying, hey, should we add this edit function to Twitter? And even Jack Dorsey, you know, the former CEO of Twitter, retweeted Elon's poll and said, hey, you know, make sure you be careful how you guys vote because this is going to have some serious implications. So like even Jack Dorsey is saying that, yeah, Elon is going to have a larger effect than he's had before, you know. And one interesting thing about being on the board of directors, so for Twitter, at least, if you are on the board of directors, you can't own more than 14% of the stock. So this essentially, some people are saying that when they found out that, okay, Elon is the largest stakeholder, we don't want him to completely take over the company. So in order to give him more power, in order to appease him, we're going to appoint him to the board of directors, but then it's also putting a cap on what he can purchase, on how much control he can actually have. But I think it's definitely an interesting, you know, an interesting story, because one way I heard it put was, let's say if you enjoy a game, right? If you like playing a game and you have some critiques or maybe some, hey, I think this would improve the game, and you were, let's say, the world's richest person, in theory, if you really like a game that much, you could purchase the company that makes the game. And then all of your little, oh, I wish the game was like this, or I wish the game was like that. Well, no, if you have enough money, you can actually make the game how you want it to be. But instead of it being a game, it's Twitter. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Elon has been very vocal, and a lot of people are vocal with what they think of Twitter, what they think of any platform, really. But Elon is in a very unique position where he's very vocal. He thinks, you know, things should be done a different way, but he's also, you know, he also has enough money that he gets to say how some things might get done. Yeah. Like the edit button. You know, people have been complaining about there not being an edit button since the beginning of Twitter. But now, less than or just 3 days, you know, now just 3 days after Elon becoming the biggest shareholder, it seems like there's a fast track on the edit button. So I think it's definitely an interesting story. It's going to be interesting to see how it develops, but it also, you know, it kind of shows you, one, the kind of influence or the kind of power, I guess, that Elon can have, because he's such a, you know, he's such a wealthy figure, where if he thinks, you know, maybe he thinks a company should be run slightly different, he could actually buy part of that company and have a say in how it's run. But then also in terms of his influence, right? He's a large shareholder. He doesn't own Twitter. He doesn't necessarily get to decide exactly how it runs. He has some say, but just his name being attached to Twitter, socially, people see it as more valuable. They're willing to pay more money for the stocks. I'm sure there's a lot of options being taken out on it too. So, you know, it's showing that Elon is both a juggernaut when it comes to finance, because he is the richest person in the world, but also in terms of, you know, social wealth. A lot of people value what Elon has to say and what he's willing to put his name behind.
Yeah. I think that's 100% the key in this situation, which is Elon's social wealth and the amount of conversation he can drum up from just a tweet. And I think this is important for him to do specifically because he uses Twitter so much. Like, Twitter is a huge part of his celebrity and his image in order to communicate with all of his followers. And I don't mean just his followers on Twitter. I mean his followers that, you know, love Tesla and love SpaceX and love the Boring Company. And wow, why am I forgetting the things the company where he puts the chip in your head? Neuralink, and love Neuralink. But, you know, I think this is a lot of marketing. Like, and it's funny, I don't necessarily think of Elon Musk as a marketing genius, or, you know, genius is the wrong word, but a marketing kind of guy, the way we talk about Carl Pei or something like that. But, you know, this is actually quite interesting if you look at the story of how this played out, because in March 25th, he tweeted out, he put out a tweet talking about, hey, do you really like the way Twitter is now, or do you want to see things change, maybe become, a little bit more free and stuff like that? And he's like, he kind of put out the same kind of idea of like, hey, I really want to know your thoughts. This could dictate how, I use Twitter or, stuff like that. Essentially giving the idea that the people who vote on or, comment on his post or engage with his post could have a direct correlation with what he decides to do. And then after that, it comes out that he bought, 9.2% stake in Twitter. But the reality is he made that purchase, I think 11 days. I think it was March 14th before he even put out that tweet, which is very similar to when he talked about donating his money, right? Like he already made the decision to donate the money before he put out the tweet, but the tweet is what gets the conversation going. So regardless of if he did it beforehand, it doesn't matter because the people who tweeted at him felt engaged in his decision, even though that wasn't the case. It's the feeling, oh, I'm engaged in what Elon does. And he's so very good at that, of getting his followers to feel engaged in what he does. And similar thing with the edit button, when he put out the tweet about, hey, do you want to see an edit button in Twitter? And, vote carefully because this could have a direct correlation for how quickly we get this button done. But then, Jay Sullivan put out a tweet on April 5th saying, hey, we've been working on an edit button for the past year, and we know it's going to be coming soon. So it's like, yeah, he's putting out these tweets, and it's making it seem like the people who are engaging with these tweets have a direct correlation with what's happening. The reality is the decisions have already happened, even before anyone engages with them. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like it's a real-time thing, and Elon has been very, very good at that. Now, overall, I don't know what this means for Twitter or Elon. I imagine that, this is definitely going to be a huge boost, as we've already seen. Shares went up as much as 27% since his announcement. So it's definitely going to be a huge hit for them financially, or a huge boon for them financially. But overall, I don't know what it really means for the social media. I don't use it much or at all. So I don't really, and I don't necessarily see Elon being attached to a social network as a big thing in terms of getting me involved in it. I'm not the biggest Elon Musk fan, so to speak. It doesn't mean like I don't like the guy, but I mean like I'm not one of his, I don't follow everything that he does. And I imagine maybe, hopefully this, for Twitter, this gets more people interested in joining the platform or engaging with the platform more regularly. I'm curious, do you think that it will have that effect, that more people will flock to Twitter, maybe away from Meta and Facebook, or I don't know who else is out there, MySpace? Do you think they'll flock to Twitter to join Elon and kind of this change in the ecosystem? And is this something that you're interested in at all? Are you now more excited about Twitter now that Elon is involved?
To be honest, I'm not particularly more interested now that Elon's involved. I use, Twitter fairly regularly. Do I think an edit button's a good idea? Yeah, I do. It's, it could definitely be useful for the times where you make typos, but I'm not someone who thinks that, Twitter is completely broken. Yeah, I don't think it's that. I don't think there's that much of an overhaul needed. And, you brought up Meta, or I guess Facebook, you brought up MySpace. I don't think Twitter can fundamentally change what it is, right? I think it still needs to become a text platform. I remember when Twitter first launched, it was like, oh yeah, you pretty much just take your wall from Facebook. You take your statuses from Facebook, and that's all you're posted on Twitter. And it kind of didn't really make sense to me then. It makes a lot more sense now. But I don't think Twitter can fundamentally change that aspect of itself and try and copy someone else, or try and, maybe become a TikTok or become a YouTube. I think Twitter needs to stay what Twitter is. There might be some things it could get better at. Like maybe they can monetize a bit better, but I mean, like the largest things that I've seen Elon propose is, one, the edit button, And he's also proposing to make tweets longer. So you can make them 420 characters. That's a proposition that he's made. But I definitely think it's going to drum up some interest. But I also think most of the people who will flock to something because Elon is on it are probably already on Twitter because Elon is so vocal on it.
True. That's a good point.
I don't think it's going to bring that many new people onto the platform, but we'll see. Maybe he has some brand new ideas. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he's very good at coming up with ideas, I guess. So he could come up with something that's going to say, hey, this is only available on the new Twitter. But at the moment, I don't think it's going to change that much for the platform.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. But, hopefully we do see some good ideas come out of this, or even just more investment to where these good ideas can actually be like financially viable. I would love to see an extension to Twitter Blue. That their subscription service where you can subscribe to someone's particular account and get like exclusive tweets. I think that could be really cool. I always like to see more tools for creators to kind of monetize their stuff. So who knows? Maybe Elon could be, the highest earning Twitter Blue member on the platform, and maybe that brings a little bit more eyes to, hey, this is a viable platform for creators to make money. But who knows?
I guess if there's one thing that I hope Elon can bring to it is better monetization for creators. You mentioned Twitter Blue. That's something that's fairly new. Like I want to say within the last year.
Yeah.
But in terms of, creators trying to make money off of things that they create, right now it's YouTube by far at the top. And then I would say Instagram behind and then TikTok. But even then, like Instagram, it's usually you get brand deals or you get some sort of brand coordination through your Instagram.
Yeah.
And even TikTok, like there's a fund that they've created, but there isn't direct monetization the way that there is on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how. Maybe, as you mentioned, it's an extension of Twitter Blue, or maybe there's some other form of monetization that Elon can come up with. But I think if there's one thing I hope that he brings, or I hope that this brings, would be that.
Yeah, 100%. And our final topic of the podcast is General Motors and Honda. They are partnering up to make the future of electric vehicles more affordable. We've seen a lot of electric vehicles come out in the past few years. We talked about them a lot on this podcast. I think we've even mentioned how we think, the next few years are definitely going to be the years of electric vehicles, and, they're really going to start to take over. But there's been one big issue, and that is electric vehicles are incredibly expensive, especially when compared to traditional gas-powered vehicles. There really isn't the economy electric vehicle right now. We have seen things like the Nissan Leaf in the past. We also have things like the Tesla Model 3. But when you compare them to similarly priced or similarly spec'd gas-powered vehicles, they're generally much more expensive. And it seems like GM and Honda want to partner up to bring electric vehicles that are going to be below the $30,000 mark, which is something we really haven't seen yet. We've heard Elon Musk talk about how he wanted to make a vehicle under that amount, potentially even something even cheaper than the Tesla Model 3 and a smaller vehicle. We haven't seen that yet. Even the Tesla Model 3 has struggled to hit that $35,000 US price point that it mainly tried to hit when it first was announced. But, by 2027, GM and Honda want to partner together. And they say GM and Honda will share our best technology, design, and manufacturing strategies to deliver affordable and desirable EVs on the global scale, including our key markets in North America, South America, China. And I think this is key because we've definitely seen a staggered approach to launch of electric vehicles so far. For example, Tesla has mainly launched their vehicles in North America, and then had a slow rollout across other markets like Europe and China. That's starting to speed up a little bit more now with factories in China, and now their new factory in Germany. So hopefully that can kind of take shape. But it took a lot of investment for them to get there. With companies like GM and Honda, who are traditional manufacturers, I would imagine they could probably scale that world production up a lot quicker by partnering together, and that's probably their idea. And the biggest thing is it's going to be using GM's Ultium tech, which we've also talked a lot about on this podcast. You know, it's the tech behind the Hummer, the really impressive Hummer that they just released. And it's this modular tech where they can have like a skateboard of batteries underneath the vehicle that can be completely adapted to different sizes of vehicles, different battery capacities, and essentially just slotted into a vehicle platform very seamlessly. And when they announced it, I think we both said, hey, this is really cool. This seems like it's going to be great for one, repairability, because, the batteries are essentially modular at that point, where they take all these cells and they connect them together wirelessly with like these contact pads. And, if you need to remove batteries or replace them, it's not like you have to go through tons of wiring that you would in a traditional vehicle, a traditional electric vehicle right now. So, yeah, I think this is definitely a great partnership for Honda, because they get to use that really great design of Ultium. And I think it's a great partnership for GM, because I think it helps them expand, like they mentioned, their electric vehicle market to, all throughout North America, South America, and China by partnering together. So yeah, this could be a really, really cool thing to see. Definitely, hopefully by 2027. I'm hoping maybe even earlier than that we can see vehicles below the $30,000 mark. But I think this is definitely a mission that most companies are going to try to tackle. Getting these lower priced electric vehicles. But I'm curious, do you think that we need these lower priced electric vehicles? Do you think 2027 is too late? I'm curious, what is your opinion on this partnership between GM and Honda?
I definitely think we need these more affordable electric vehicles. At the moment, as you said, it's mostly, no one has cracked that $30,000 price tag. You look at the Teslas, you look at the Porsches, you look at even the Mustang Mach-E isn't a cheap car, or I wouldn't say cheap. It's not a widely affordable car.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about, electric vehicles becoming mainstream, it needs to be easily affordable for people. So it's not just, hey, maybe you're buying a 10-year-old Model S, which is why it's more affordable, but you should be able, or you need to be able to buy a brand new affordable electric vehicle that you could have for 10 years, 20 years, maybe, as opposed to buying something that's, that's been driven, that's battery's been worn down, that who knows what's happened to it. Right. So I think this is a great sign. I didn't know that they were working together. I think I read in a press briefing that, GM and Honda say they're going to continue their long-standing partnership. And it's like, I didn't know they had a partnership to begin with, but, I'm glad they're continuing it. Sounds like it's going to work out good for us as consumers. But for the longest time, we've said that, the Teslas, the Porsches, the Mercedes, yeah, they're great vehicles and all. But as soon as you get something like a Honda Civic or a Toyota Camry and you electrify it, that's it. It's done. Electric vehicles have taken over. When you look at how successful their gas-powered vehicles are, if you were then able to take those, the same form factor, the same, let's say, recipe that they've used to make those vehicles, and you make them electric, so you get lower maintenance or pretty much non-existent maintenance, you get better mileage, you get better acceleration, possibly better handling, and it's affordable too. That's definitely a win for the consumer. So I think as soon as we get that $30,000 price tag, as soon as we can crack that line with maybe something like a Honda Civic, maybe a Honda Accord, or maybe some new vehicle, but I think it would be smart of them to use the well-known, name tag of a Civic or an Accord or something like that. As soon as we get something like that, I think we are going to see the numbers of electric vehicles on the road explode. And I think it's going to be hard to sell gas-powered vehicles, especially for the same price that, you've been seeing them at. Because if you have an option where, okay, let's say a brand new Honda Civic is $20,000, whether it's electric or whether it's gas. But then when you look at the electric one, it's, okay, I don't have to bring it in for maintenance like every 3 months. I don't have to pay for gas because I can just charge it at home. And, let's say 10 years from now, maybe I'll need a battery replacement, but my overall maintenance is going to be a lot lower. It just makes more sense to go electric. So I think this is a huge deal. Like, it's a huge announcement. Like I said, I didn't know GM and Honda were working so closely together. I'm glad to hear or glad to read that they're continuing their long-standing partnership, and I'm looking forward to see when we do get this vehicle, these first vehicles from them. Now, as you said, 2027. I don't think it's too far away. I also think it's going to be later than 2027. Being, whether you want to call me a realist or a pessimist, I would say 2030 seems more accurate. But, hey, I could be wrong. Maybe we get it early. Maybe 2025 we get them. But yeah, I think very needed. Looking forward to it. But 2027, maybe they announce it in 2027 and then it actually comes out in like 2030. I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. And 2025 is an interesting year because GM did say that they plan to be able to make and sell about 2 million EVs globally by 2025, which I find kind of interesting because last year, 2021, they sold just over 6 million vehicles. So, that's like a third of what their current production is right now. And it kind of begs the question. We've talked about, Tesla's production issues in the past. And also we've seen definitely some supply chain issues hit the car industry. And definitely, I think it's hit electric vehicles the hardest. And it kind of begs the question, is there maybe an unseen issue with electric vehicles that we probably aren't noticing that's slowing down, one, the price decreasing, and two, even just the production of these vehicles? Because maybe, who knows, maybe it could be getting materials for batteries that, is maybe much more expensive and time consuming than it is to build an engine. Maybe it's these electric vehicles need, more powerful chips to control these motors and the battery management systems on these vehicles. There's so much that maybe we don't know that is slowing down these vehicles, where they're probably saying, hey, 2027, that's probably the earliest we can even conceive of making a vehicle under $30,000. But yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of questions on whether or not electric vehicles can even hit that date for under $30,000, or even if maybe they're the direction that these companies should be going. I think we have seen a report from, I believe it was Volvo a while ago, talking about how, hey, you know what? Fully electric vehicles are actually not as green right now as a hybrid vehicle, because the lithium needed for these huge lithium ion batteries is so detrimental. The mining for them is so detrimental to the environment. And, what happens when these batteries die? Do they just go into a landfill and you need to mine some more lithium? Like, there's a lot of questions around how much it takes to make these batteries. And I think that's a huge sticking point for these companies. That being said, with Honda and General Motors teaming together, maybe that helps them say, together we can have a better opportunity to get more lithium for our vehicles. Together we can build batteries quicker and faster, maybe make a joint battery plant that so we can produce these vehicles a lot faster. Because yeah, it definitely seems like producing these vehicles is a little bit of an issue for them. So the fact that they only think that they can reach, honestly, less than a third of their electric by 2025. So yeah, it's definitely going to be an uphill battle for them going forward. But 100%, I do agree with you. I think lower than $30,000 is going to be necessary, especially with more markets mandating, including Canada, starting to mandate that, hey, they want only electric vehicles to be sold by the 2030s, maybe mid 2030s, 2035 or so. But if cars aren't affordable, that's not going to happen, right? So yeah, this is definitely a huge hurdle that they have to solve before we can actually get more electric vehicles on the road.
Yeah, definitely. Guess any closing statements?
No, it's just going to be cool to see. I definitely will take back my earlier statement of seeing more electric vehicles being sold than gas powered by, next year or even 2024, because from GM's estimates, it sounds like they're going to be really difficult to produce. So yeah, maybe the changeover from gas to electric might be a lot further than we might have initially thought.
Yeah. Guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Mm-hmm.
Take it easy, everyone in podcast land.
Catch you in the next episode.